By 2002, Detective Terry Bjorndal was on the case. In February of that year, Linda, Maria's sister, called asking for a status update. Detective Bjorndal had to tell her that no work had been done on the investigation since 1987. He promised to check the physical evidence they still had to see if the items could be tested using updated techniques now available. It doesn't sound like any testing was done because in October 2005, Detective Derek Graham updated Linda and Erica with the first reference to DNA in this case. He told the sisters that the Colorado Springs PD was looking to see if any evidence could be submitted for DNA testing. Again, nothing appears to have been submitted at this time. By 2009, the detective was Joseph Matiados. He got a call from Linda in January of that year and again told her he would look to see whether there was any DNA available. I can't imagine how frustrated the family must have been at the absolutely glacial pace at which the case was being worked. In December of that year, 2009, Colorado Springs Sergeant Jeff Jensen, supervisor for the cold case unit, arranged for the Colorado Springs Gazette to publish an article and case synopsis to remind the public that the Maria Honzell case remained open. The article said that the police department's cold case homicide unit had about 90 unsolved homicide cases dating back to 1949. That partially explained why so little movement was going on. In June 2010, Detective Nicole Poole was assigned the Maria Honzell case. She reviewed the physical evidence and observed there was biological evidence that was suspected to have come from Maria's killer. Federal grant money that had been recently made available to the cold case unit facilitated testing of these items. So finally, in July 2010, Detective Poole sent the following items to the Metro Forensic Crime Lab for testing: the hairs found in Maria's palms, the bloody knife hilt, the jumpsuit, the necklace, the fingernail scrapings, and the blood scrapings from the bathroom door jamb and sink. Again, the testing took ages. Results would not be available for 2 years. In the meantime, detectives were continually contacted by members of Maria's family who would not give up on her case. These included Maria's brother David Honzell and Maria's sister Erica. Maria's nieces Jasmine and Glenna also regularly requested status updates, even though they hadn't been born during Maria's short lifetime. Maria's sister Linda was the most involved in pushing the investigators along until she died in 2012, never having answers as to who killed her beloved little sister. In February 2012, Sarah Lewis at the CBI reported that 3 separate bloodstains on the jumpsuit she tested contained consistent DNA from an unknown male. The DNA contained a sufficient number of markers for entry into CODIS, which was by now the standard for DNA comparison. But there were no hits in the database. Maria's killer had not committed any other serious crimes known to investigators. So the only remaining investigative action available to the cold case unit was testing the male DNA and evidence against specific suspects. DNA was gathered from items collected from Ronnie Proul during the early investigation, his motorcycle helmet and slippers, and was not a match. This was a surprise to many who still believed Proul likely killed Maria. A standard from George A. also ruled him out. There were no answers, and the case stalled again. It would go dormant for nearly 7 years, until, in 2019, there was a big push for publicity for Maria's unsolved case. Detectives gave an interview to Fox 21 News in 2019. This long quote comes from there. "Cases of this age, you start worrying," said Detective James Isham, a member of the Colorado Springs Police Department's Homicide Unit Cold Case Division. "Every second that goes by, evidence is disappearing, statements are changing, and we know that we're running out of time," said Detective J.F. Samosky, the other member of CSPD's Cold Case Division. "It's been 42 years since Maria was murdered." "This one is especially heinous because, it's a child," Samosky said. "She had her entire life ahead of her. All those opportunities were taken away in such a violent fashion." Several suspects were identified. One was identified in Rhode Island after being arrested on a similar case where a young girl had been murdered. That person, based on the investigation, was placed in Colorado Springs at the time of Maria's death, leaving shortly afterwards, end quote. He was talking about Ronnie Proul, who had been cleared by DNA after being a suspect for decades. In the spring of 2019, a new detective picked up the Maria Honzell cold case. Throughout the summer of 2019, Detective Rachel Cruz Rogers familiarized herself with the case and noted that all the main suspects had been eliminated by DNA. Then Sergeant Corey Dabb of the Cold Case Homicide Unit and Technician M. Woods from the CBI decided it was time to try and progress the case using forensic genealogy. The department had had some luck using the new technique, solving the Jennifer Watkins and Darlene Krashock cases, both of which I've covered. And there was ample DNA in Maria's case from the foreign blood left on Maria's jumpsuit. Detective Isham submitted samples to Parabon Nanolabs in mid-2019, and their partner lab was able to obtain a SNP profile from the blood on the jumpsuit. On January 8, 2020, the Colorado Springs PD received a preliminary report from Parabon. On the 9th, Sergeant Dabb, Detective Cruz Rogers, Detective Isham, and Deputy DA Christina Perroni attended a phone conference with Parabon about its report. Parabon had uploaded the suspect profile to GEDmatch, and the results were somewhat disappointing. They had found only very low-level matches, with the top match sharing only 59 centimorgans of DNA with the suspect. This was along the lines of a 6th to 10th degree relative. The highest probability was that the suspect was a third cousin once removed or equivalent relationship to the suspect, pretty distant. But her sister also shared 31 centimorgans of DNA with the suspect, meaning that the relationship was likely even more distant. Match number 1's maternal uncle had also tested and was in GEDmatch and shared no DNA with the suspect, which told the genealogist, C.C. Moore, that the suspect was related to match number 1 and her sister on their paternal side. Their father was the one whose tree was somehow connected to the suspect. The next 2 matches in GEDmatch shared 38 and 35 centimorgans with the suspect. There was a pool of matches who all shared DNA with the suspect in the same range. Matches 13 and 14 both shared 27 centimorgans with the suspect, but matches 1, 2, and 3 shared 0 DNA with each other, which meant they were all related to the suspect on different branches of his family tree. So Cece built out the top match's family tree to her paternal great-great-grandparent level. Prominent last names in that tree were Ralston, Westenberger, Ryday, and Reeves. Cece also noted distinct connections to Pennsylvania. At this point in the investigation, she built out the family tree of Ronald Gordon Proul, as investigators had provided her with his name as a very likely suspect. He had died in 2015. She attempted to see whether Proul's tree intersected anyway with the tree of the top match, but no dice. Quote, based on the fact that his father of record is documented to be of exclusively French-Canadian ancestry, and the suspect does not have significant matches with French-Canadian ancestry, it is unlikely that Proul is the subject. However, there was always the possibility that Proul is the subject of an adoption or misattributed paternity event that is obscured from the public records. For this reason, he cannot be definitively ruled out at this point. One of his 3 siblings could be contacted by the agency and asked to test in order to rule him out or in as a subject. Cece recommended the Parabon pause their genealogy research while the suspect profile was uploaded to Family Tree DNA. Sergeant Dabb contacted Family Tree DNA and uploaded the suspect's data file onto their website on January 21, 2020. Unfortunately, Family Tree DNA didn't contain DNA profiles of anyone more closely related to the suspect than the 59 centimorgan female relative found in GEDmatch. However, the next 2 matches on Family Tree DNA contained 44 and 41 centimorgans of shared DNA respectively, moving them into match positions 2 and 3. The detectives started contacting some of the matches to see if they could gather information about their family trees. A woman in Canada who was one of the top matches had no idea about any family in Colorado. On February 27, 2020, Detective Gregory contacted the 4th match, a woman named E. Hall, who had constructed a family tree and was able to relate the names of her ancestors, surnames Hall, Taylor, Prentice, and Barber. But no connection to the trees of any other DNA matches or to Colorado were located. On March 10, 2020, Detective Cruz Rogers contacted a woman first initial M, who was a match to the Ralston family tree. Detective Cruz Rogers told M. Ralston that, quote, the information I have is that the possible suspect would be on your father's side of the family tree. M. Ralston emailed her saying, quote, hello, Detective Cruz Rogers. You might imagine my surprise to hear from someone in the Colorado Springs Police Department. I follow with interest news articles on the methodology of solving cold cases by using family history research via publicly shared DNA results. As a family historian for more than 30 years, both for my family and the families of many friends, I applaud the use of this exhaustive research for the purpose of finding and convicting those who commit crimes, and especially to give peace to the families of their victims. It's why I opted in. Most of my family, particularly on my father's side, were from the Philadelphia area and didn't wander very far afield. By way of background, though, my father was orphaned at a young age and knew very little of his family, end quote. It wasn't very helpful, but there was that Pennsylvania connection again. As the Colorado Springs investigators continued to funnel information to her, Cece continued to work the case. She tells me that she did a lot of the work on this case in her own time. She built out trees of about 25 of the suspects' matches found on GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. Her July 2020 report to the CSPD noted that match number 1 was believed to be related to the suspect on her paternal side. Her father's surname was Ralston. So Cece recommended contacting the top 2 matches and asking if they knew of any relatives in Colorado Springs. She also identified potential reference testers who were descended from her paternal grandmother's parents to try to obtain DNA from that underrepresented part of the tree. Match number 1's grandmother's surname was Ride, and her mother's maiden name was Reeves. 2 living people descended from the Reeves-Ride union back in the 1870s were recommended for testing. When the first woman was contacted, she said she would be willing to upload her previous test results to GEDmatch. When she did, they showed she shared 0 DNA with the suspect. Her mother, another recommended reference tester, refused to participate. But the fact that the suspect and this woman, match number 1's second cousin once removed, shared no DNA, meant that match number 1 was most likely related to the suspect on her paternal grandfather's line. Another person contacted agreed to do a DNA test to assist the investigation. This person also shared no DNA with the suspect, ruling out another branch of the tree. Cece provided Colorado Springs Detective Cruz Rogers with a list of possible surnames for the suspects she could see in the family tree. So the detective pored over the case file for men with the last names Ride, Ralston, West, Reeves, Boatger, Dowell, Brown, Abbott, Groom, Dennis, Rossetti, McCausland, Westenberger, Getz, O'Brien, Ames, Campbell, Cockrell, Hall, and Evans. Detective Cruz Rogers knew that H.C. Evans was mentioned in the case file as someone who knew Maria and had a confrontation with her. He had reportedly slapped her. The files indicated that contemporary detectives had confirmed he was living in Ohio with a relative, Ms. Edna Hall, and there was another surname on the list at the time of the murder. Ms. Hall had confirmed H.C. had not left Ohio to go to Colorado Springs at all, so the OG detectives had ruled out H.C. as Maria's killer. In November 2020, Detective Gregory tried to contact H.C. Evans, who had quite a few arrests for domestic violence, motor vehicle violations, and drugs. She finally located him in Ohio and ruled him out, although I have no record of how that was done. It was back to the case file. The cold case detectives started re-interviewing the key players in the case to help flesh out their understanding of the case and to see if these witness stories were consistent and see if they remembered anything helpful. On June 18, 2020, Detective Cruz Rogers and Detective Gregory contacted George A. They sat down with him and explained to him that they were new to the cold case unit and were familiarizing themselves with Maria's case. He was surprised to hear that the case was still unsolved and said he was under the impression that the killer had been caught. Let me just say as an aside here, quite a few of the people in Maria's life were under the impression that the case had been solved because the detectives at the time had basically told everyone that Ronald Pruill did it. Anyway, George didn't really know much about the case and said he would call them if he remembered anything. In July 2020, Detective Cruz Rogers interviewed Mark R., the guy who had reportedly been caught in a bedroom with a drunken and underage Maria. He had only very nice things to say about her. He said everyone liked her and she was a very nice person. He said the police did a very good job of investigating everyone and admitted that when they came to talk to him at his mom and dad's house, he got cocky and mouthy and his dad smacked him and told him to cooperate. He told Detective Cruz Rogers that he always believed George A. had killed Maria because he was the only person who regularly called her Babe. In November 2020, Detective Cruz Rogers spent some time trying to track down Michael A. She finally got him on the phone and found that he really didn't remember much about Maria at all, including her name. They had only been dating a couple of weeks, he said. Detective Cruz Rogers said she had to ask whether he had anything to do with Maria's death. He said no, and he had been surprised and upset by the whole thing. On the phone, Michael A. agreed to give a DNA sample. Detective Cruz Rogers contacted the police in Salinas, California, and requested that they collect buccal swabs from him. They did, and the swabs were sent to the Colorado Springs police and provided to the lab for testing against the suspect DNA profile. They didn't match. Michael was ruled out. This was all consistent with what Cece Moore had found as part of her work on the genealogy. She had built out trees for 2 other suspects besides Ronald Pruill, Michael A. and Mark R. She was able to rule both of them out, as their genetic heritage was not consistent with those of the suspects' matches. So that was that. The case was dormant, and the forensic genealogy had stalled. A year later, on September 5, 2021, Sergeant Corey Dabb received an email from Cece Moore. Cece informed him that she had made a significant development in her research into Maria's case. In short, she'd identified a potential suspect. Her persistence in following the DNA trail had pointed her to a man named William Charles Kernan Jr. Here's how she found him. Remember that the DNA matches indicated that match number 1 was likely related to the suspect through her paternal grandfather. The paternal grandfather's mother's parents were Harry Westenberger, born 1806, and Margaret Getz, born 1817. Their daughter, Margaret Westenberger, had married a Ralston, which explained that surname in match number 1 and match number 4's ancestral line. Another daughter, Susan Westenberger, was an ancestor to a William B. Kernan, born 1929. His son, William Charles Kernan Jr., born 1949, a third cousin once removed to match number 1, was the only descendant from that branch of the family tree that had ties to Colorado Springs. In fact, he was living there at the time that Maria was killed when he was 27 years old. The cold case investigators dug into Kernan, hoping to confirm Cece's hypothesis and nail Maria's killer at long last. But it was not to be. William Kernan Jr. had died in 2010 in Cheyenne Wells, Colorado. They were going to have to try to obtain his DNA, but this was going to be way more difficult than one would think. Kernan had been cremated. DNA has yet to be extracted from cremains, although I understand at least one lab is working on this. In October 2021, Detective Cruz Rogers contacted the coroner in Cheyenne Wells, hoping that a blood card had been retained when Kernan died. The current coroner told her she needed to talk to his mom, as she'd been the coroner in 2010. The former coroner, Miss Kern, a very confusing name given that our suspect is named Kernan, said she recalled the death of William Kernan, but that he had died at Keefe Memorial Hospital after an unspecified prolonged illness. There was no autopsy conducted and hence no samples retained. No luck on the DNA from that angle. So the next step was to find living relatives of Kernan's to test. Well, Kernan's parents were both deceased, and his father had only half-siblings, no full siblings. Further, Kernan was an only child. He had no siblings that could provide DNA, and even worse, he had no biological children of his own. On March 31st, 2022, Detective Cruz Rogers had a meeting with Parabon. They discussed ways in which to obtain DNA from Kernan. One option was to exhume his parents. When Kernan's mother, Patricia Ann Caudill Kernan, died in 1991, the funeral arrangements were handled by Anderson McQueen Funeral Home in St. Petersburg, Florida. However, it was unclear whether she was buried or cremated. But investigators knew that Kernan's father, William C. Kernan Sr., was buried at St. Dominic Church Cemetery in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Section M, Lot 2, Grave 1. The Colorado Springs investigators wrote up a search warrant to conduct an exhumation of William Kernan Sr. And this is the first time I've ever heard of this happening, but apparently a Pennsylvania judge refused the exhumation request. I don't know if he or she didn't understand the genetic evidence necessitating obtaining a DNA sample from William Kernan Sr., but the request was denied. The only other option was to try to locate more distant but living relatives of William Kernan Jr. In Cece's report, she had identified some elderly women in Pennsylvania whom she believed, based on the family tree she had constructed, were aunts to William Kernan Jr. The aunts were Jane M. and Jean C. As all this was happening, Jean C. died in November 2021. Her obituary mentioned she was an aunt to Bill, but Jane was still alive at 86 years old. Detective Cruz Rogers got in touch with Jane and her adult son on January 17, 2022. She told Jane that her DNA could help in assisting a cold case homicide investigation and would be used purely for comparison purposes, and after the analysis was completed, the sample would be destroyed. Jane agreed to give DNA. The Maple Shade Police Department went to Jane's nursing home and collected buccal swabs from her and sent them to Colorado Springs. On February 9, 2022, Detective Cruz Rogers FedExed the buccal swabs from Jane to Akisogen. That lab's kinship testing showed that Jane shared 819 centimorgans of DNA with the suspect, whose blood was found on Maria Honzell. This was inconsistent with the documented full aunt-nephew relationship between Jane and William Kernan Jr., and reflected more of a half-relationship. It was posited that it was likely Jane was a half-sister to Kernan's mother, Patricia. But nonetheless, the DNA relationships all fit into place. Matches 1 and 4 were third cousins once removed on William Kernan's father's side of the family, while Aunt Jane was the sister of William's mother. As an aside, Jane died in 2023 at age 88. R.I.P. Jane, and thank you for helping to provide the Honzell family with resolution.
Every day, predators are targeting children and teens online. The Department of Homeland Security's Know to Protect campaign provides resources to combat online child exploitation and abuse. Learn how you can help protect our kids online and join the fight. Visit knowtoprotect.gov so together we can stop online child exploitation. That's KNOW, 2, protect.gov.
The Colorado Springs investigators wanted some more data. Detective Cruz Rogers found an obituary for a half-brother of William Kernan Jr.'s father, William Kernan Sr. This half-brother, Thomas Kernan, had a living son, D. Kernan. This D. Kernan was William Kernan Sr.'s half-nephew and William Kernan Jr.'s cousin. In April 2022, Detective Cruz Rogers contacted D. Kernan. Her notes say, quote, "I introduced myself and explained that we were attempting to collect his DNA to assist with an investigation in which we were utilizing genetic genealogy. Upon asking Mr. Kernan if he would be willing to assist us, Mr. Kernan confirmed he would be willing to provide his DNA," end quote. The Philadelphia Police Department met with D. Kernan and collected a DNA sample. The buccal swabs were sent to Detective Cruz Rogers on May 23, 2022. She submitted them to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for DNA analysis. I don't have the specific statistics on this one, but the results were another confirmation of William Kernan Jr. being Maria Honzell's killer. I was told that if Kernan were alive today when he was identified, he would have been charged with Maria's murder by Colorado Springs authorities. So who was this Kernan guy? William Charles Kernan Jr. was born to parents William Charles Kernan Sr. and Patricia Ann Caudle Kernan on February 11, 1949, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know next to nothing about his younger life, although there were reports from interviewees that Kernan did not have a good relationship with his mother, and he left the Philadelphia area and never went back. As we heard, though, he stayed in touch with his aunts. Kernan got married on June 7, 1976, to a woman I am calling Bonnie in Colorado Springs. She brought 2 daughters into the marriage who became his stepdaughters. The couple had no children of their own. In 1976 to 1977, William Kernan was a college student at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. In October 76, he was on the ballot in the El Paso County general election to represent District 3 on the Home Rule Commission, people seeking a charter for their county to be independently run. He was also in the Colorado Springs Gazette on February 22, 1976, a year before he killed Maria, as one of the students making honor roll in the School of Letters, Arts, and Sciences. Yes, William Kernan Jr., murderer of 14-year-old Maria Honzell, was a high academic achiever. Kernan worked as a representative for Mutual of Omaha and United of Omaha Life Insurance Company in Colorado Springs. He completed a comprehensive insurance course at the National Sales Training Center in Omaha in September 1977, the year he killed Maria. He went on to become a financial advisor. Eventually, he and his wife moved to Cheyenne Wells and opened a restaurant together called the Gap Bar and Grill. Kernan died on August 7, 2010, at Keefe Memorial Hospital in Cheyenne Wells. His obituary notes that he was survived by his aunts, Jean C. and Jane M. An arrest record for William Kernan Jr. showed that in the year 1977, the year he killed Maria, he and his wife were living at 811 Pioneer Lane in Colorado Springs, approximately 5 miles from the apartment complex where Maria was killed. On September 14, 2021, Sergeant Dabb, Detective Cruz Rogers, and Detective Lemcole went to interview Kernan's former wife Bonnie at the Gap restaurant in Cheyenne Wells. They told her they were investigating a cold case and asked her to tell them about her second husband, William Kernan Jr. Bear in mind that at this point in the investigation, the detectives did not have confirmation that the DNA from the unknown suspect who killed Maria Honzell was consistent with the DNA of William Kernan Jr.'s relatives. Bonnie moved to Colorado Springs with her 2 daughters and met Kernan there in 1975. He was from Philadelphia, she said, but he hated it there, and once he left, he never went back. They married in 1976, and Kernan worked for an insurance company and attended the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, studying accounting, finance, and economics. He went on to become a certified financial planner, and the family moved to Phoenix, Arizona in 1984 because Kernan got a job with American Express. Then they moved to Heidelberg, Germany, and then back to the U.S. to live in Florida, and finally ended up in Cheyenne Wells. There they bought the restaurant The Gap, which they ran together until Kernan passed away in 2010. The investigators asked about Kernan's family. Bonnie confirmed he had no children and was an only child, and most of his relatives were deceased. He did have 2 aunts still living in Pennsylvania, she said. Yep, we know all about Jean and Jane. Then the investigators asked Bonnie if she had any idea what they could be investigating her husband for, and she said she couldn't even imagine what it could be about, unless it was before she knew him. A quote from Detective Cruz Rogers' report. I asked Mrs. Kernan how their relationship was. She explained it was great. Mrs. Kernan explained Mr. Kernan was a great guy. He just loved people. They ended up in Cheyenne Wells because Mr. Kernan wanted to own a bar where everyone knew your name. Cheers to that. Then they told Bonnie that a records check had shown that Kernan had been arrested in Colorado Springs on April 15, 1977 on a menacing charge, meaning he threatened someone and put them in fear. Bonnie said she thought this might have been the result of one incident between them in which they had a disagreement, and she called the cops on her husband and he was taken to jail. When she was asked to relate more about this incident, she said she couldn't even remember what started it, and it seemed like a minor thing, but they had a fight and Kernan kind of lost it. He didn't hit her, but he was raging and throwing things and wouldn't stop, so she called the police. They arrested him, and although the case was dismissed, he had to pay a nominal fine, and the incident remained on his record. Bonnie said that this one incident was the only one like it in their entire marriage of 34 years. That behavior was way out of the norm for him, and they generally did not argue, although he did have lingering issues from childhood. She said his parents weren't very kind to him. His mother didn't like him because he looked like her ex-husband Kernan's birth father, William Kernan Sr. It's worth noting that this incident in which Kernan lost it and threatened his wife and threw things took place just 2 months after he killed Maria. Bonnie was asked to describe her husband and what he looked like back when they lived in Colorado Springs. She said he was 6'5" and very thin. Bonnie said he usually wore jeans, but when they asked her what kind of coat he wore then, they were trying to find out if he wore a navy puffer coat like the one little John saw. She couldn't remember any specific kind of jacket. No, Bonnie said, her husband never carried a weapon that she knew of. Quote, Mrs. Kernan explained that Mr. Kernan was afraid of spiders and mice and everything else, end quote. A 6'5" guy who was afraid of bugs. She also said that he was a smoker, smoking 2 packs a day of Marlboros. This made me regret that it does not appear the OG investigators retained the cigarette butts found spilled out of the ashtray in Jenny's apartment. Finally, Detective Cruz Rogers asked Bonnie one last time whether there was anything that she could think of that Kernan ever referenced that could point to him being involved in a murder. She said she couldn't imagine it, and she was floored to think about it. She said, I guess anything is possible, but no, nothing, never. Quote, Mrs. Kernan explained that Mr. Kernan shared everything with her, she thought, and Mr. Kernan was good to the kids, end quote. At this point, Sergeant Dabb explained to her the genealogy process and how they had come up with her husband's name. They told her they suspected his potential involvement in the murder of a teenage girl in early 1977, and Bonnie marveled that they had only been married the previous June. She said again that she was floored, and it was shocking. Sergeant Dabb asked Bonnie about documentation. I suspect that this was in the solitary arrest report for Kernan that reflected that Kernan had a deformed pinky. She said she had no idea. She didn't know anything about that. The detectives were hoping she would say, oh, yes, he came home one day in February of 1977 with a cut on his pinky. But she didn't. Then they asked if Bonnie might have anything in her possession that had her husband's DNA on it. He'd been dead for 11 years, so it was a long shot. They went with her to her home, and all she could find was a shaving brush and a watch, which they declined. They asked her if she might have a navy blue puffy coat her husband wore, but she said no. A quote from the report. Sergeant Dabb explained essentially, what we have to do is verify the sample that we have belonged to Mr. Kernan. Sergeant Dabb explained one way we could do it is with a distant relative and see if there were certain markers that match up. Sergeant Dabb explained with Mr. Kernan not having children of his own, it made things more difficult. Mrs. Kernan explained his aunts, she was referring to Jane and Jean, were quite elderly, so she would hate to put them through that. And they loved Mr. Kernan. They thought he was the greatest thing. Mrs. Kernan explained Mr. Kernan's aunts felt sorry for him because Mr. Kernan's mother was an abuser of him, so they always found that interesting that he had gone the opposite way, end quote. Well, he didn't. So they struck out on obtaining DNA from Bonnie. They were going to have to reach out to extended family, Jane and Dee Kernan, for confirmatory DNA samples. As you know, they did, and the samples confirmed his identity. So what was the connection between William Charles Kernan Jr. and Maria Honzell? Well, the connection was pretty much zero. Kernan wasn't a friend of Maria's. He was a friend of Jenny Kay's. Think back to the very early investigation. Jenny Kay, the woman Maria babysat for, had called Detective Joe Kenda 2 days after the murder and told him she did know a guy who sort of fit the suspect description, except he was way too old, and John had met him and said he wasn't the teenage male who had attacked Maria. Jenny had reported that her friend from the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, Bill Kernan, was 27 years old and married, and he was having marital difficulties with his wife. He had called her at her apartment at 5 p.m. on the night of the murder and vented about his issues. Bill Kernan was William Charles Kernan Jr. At the time, Jenny had described Bill Kernan as a very tall white male, 6'3" to 6'5", 235 pounds, with scruffy brown hair and a ruddy complexion. Those characteristics didn't fully mesh with what John said about the attacker, the graying hair, the age, the acne. And John said Kernan was way bigger than the suspect. On the other hand, Jenny did report that Kernan tended to wear a large navy blue down coat, jeans, and dark sneakers, and he had a ruddy complexion which could be confused with acne by a child. It seems too much faith had been placed on John's assessment of the attacker's age. Kernan was 10 years older than the air-quote teenager John described. And looking back at Jenny's report, there were some other red flags. For one, Bill Kernan was having marital struggles and had visited Jenny, quote, on numerous occasions at her apartment. It sounds like maybe he saw her as a source of comfort in a time of turmoil in his life. Could he have misinterpreted her empathy and transferred feelings to her? Or was there something more there? A second red flag was just 2 tiny lines in the hundreds pages long case file. Jenny reported that on the 9th, 2 days after the murder, she called Bill Kernan's home to get the details from his wife Carolyn on a surprise party she was throwing for his birthday on the 11th. But Carolyn told her that Bill hadn't come home since February 7th, the night Maria was killed. But wait, William Kernan's wife was named Bonnie, not Carolyn. This is a really weird and unexplained part of the story. In doing her research on William Kernan Jr., Cece Moore had come across a divorce notice in the name of Carolyn Kernan in Orange County, California, dated April 18, 1979. The investigators asked Bonnie about this in a sort of roundabout way. Sergeant Dabb asked Bonnie if Kernan ever talked about being in California or anything like that. Bonnie said no. Quote, I asked Mrs. Kernan if Mr. Kernan had any other relationships that she was aware of with anyone else. Mrs. Kernan explained not that she knew of. I asked if he was married before. Mrs. Kernan stated no, end quote. Bonnie said she never even knew of any girlfriends he had. She and Kernan had already been married for 8 months when Maria was killed. But Jenny had reported to Detective Kenda that she was in contact with Bill Kernan's wife, Carolyn. Was this a mere coincidence that Jenny recalled his wife's name was Carolyn and a Carolyn Kernan was divorced 2 years later in 1979? Or did William Kernan have 2 different families, 2 separate lives? Another quote from the report. I asked Mrs. Kernan if I said the name Carolyn to her, if that sounded familiar at all. Mrs. Kernan stated no. She explained, we do not have any friends by the name of Carolyn, end quote. She also said that her husband could never keep a secret. Oh, really? I beg to differ. The whole Bill Kernan being friends with Jenny and having been to apartment 207 on numerous occasions answers some of the obvious questions about how he ended up there on the night Maria died. But sadly, Sergeant Dabb's report says, quote, from what I could see during a search of the case report, no additional follow-up had been conducted by Detective Kenda or any other detective into William Bill Kernan, end quote. Instead, the homicide investigation focused overwhelmingly on people who knew Maria, presuming that she was the intended target. And maybe she was. Jenny told Detective Kenda that she had seen Bill Kernan on the college campus around 6:45 p.m. on the night of the murder, February 7th, 1977. Surely Bill Kernan knew that she was in class until 11 p.m. that night. Why did he go to her apartment then? He must have known a babysitter would be there with her kids. Did he want to wait for Jenny there? Was he hoping to get an invitation to stay over? Did he knock on the door and Maria opened it and tried to send him away and he lost it? Was he frustrated and enraged at the alleged marital strife with his wife he told Jenny about and took it out on Maria? Or had he met Maria at the apartment before and hoped that she would be there? Was she the reason he was there in the first place? It was time to talk to Jenny. Detective Cruz Rogers made phone contact with Jenny on September 20th, 2021. Jenny was very surprised to hear that Maria's case was still unsolved and the CSPD was working it. Jenny was under the impression the case had been solved long ago, even if not officially closed, because she had been formally notified when they moved the suspect, Ronnie Proul, from one prison to another, so she assumed that he had done it. Again, it seems the police also assumed Proul had killed Maria and let people know that. Jenny had even been told that the girl Proul killed in Rhode Island was almost Maria's twin, and the police telling her that made her presume that they were saying he did it. She thought that they had eventually tied him to the Colorado murder as well as the one in Rhode Island. Detective Cruz Rogers told Jenny no, the case was still unsolved and they were still looking into it, and she had to ask her some questions. She told Jenny she had found a report in the case file that said Jenny had mentioned the name Bill Kernan to one of the detectives way back in 1977. She told Jenny about her description of her friend Bill as a 27-year-old white male with a receding hairline and a red face, and her report that he had visited Jenny on numerous occasions at her apartment. She reminded Jenny that Bill Kernan had called her on the day of the murder and told her he was having difficulty in his married life and was considering a divorce. She told Jenny she had called and spoken to his wife Carolyn, and Carolyn told her she hadn't seen him since the night of the murder. Jenny didn't remember this at all, or remember Bill Kernan, even when reminded that he was a classmate of hers at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. Quote, Jenny explained her friends at that time were Ed G. and his wife, and the classmates that she had at UCCS, and Jeff R., but that name did not ring a bell at all. When Jenny realized that apparently she had reported that her son John had met Bill Kernan, yet John failed to recognize him as Maria's attacker, she said it was possible that John had secretly recognized Kernan, but wouldn't say so because he was terrified that Kernan would come after him. I'll just say, though, this doesn't explain why John didn't give Kernan's name when he was hypnotized the second time, when Dr. Fish believed John was fully under and his memories were genuine. More from Detective Cruz Rogers' report, quote, at the end of my contact with Jenny, she was very upset. It should be noted that she did not want any further contact regarding this investigation. Well, who can blame her? Throughout the remainder of 2022 and 2023, the Colorado Springs authorities worked to confirm the involvement of William Charles Kernan Jr. in Maria's murder. They kept his name under wraps until they felt confident that the kinship testing confirmed their identification. Maria's family knew the case had reached a turning point and that investigators had identified a suspect, but were not privy to the information law enforcement was working with. David Honzell called the cold case detectives repeatedly for updates and was frustrated as he was told that they could not release any information. Detective Tracy Thompson wrote in her report of one of her conversations with David, quote, he said he didn't understand that if we have a possible suspect and DNA only belongs to one person, then why are we not announcing that we have a suspect? I attempted to explain that we do not have a 100% confirmation and cannot make an announcement that a person is a suspect if we don't have confirmation. I explained that if there is any possible chance it might not be the person who committed the crime, we will not announce anything due to the ramifications of naming someone who is innocent and possibly ruining their life and their family's lives. He continued to appear frustrated with having no new information. He said that all his siblings are dead and that he does not want to die before knowing who killed his sister, end quote. It took ages, but thankfully, David survived to see the case publicly resolved. In May of 2024, the 4th Judicial District Attorney's Office issued a press release. It read, CSPD detectives requested the 4th Judicial District Attorney's Office to review the case with the genetic genealogy results of Mr. Kernan. After the review is completed, the District Attorney's Office is confident the person responsible for the murder of Maria Honzell is William C. Kernan Jr. Because William C. Kernan Jr. died in 2010, the investigation into the murder of Maria Honzell will be closed out as exceptionally cleared death of offender. The family and friends of Maria Honzell have waited over 47 years to get justice for Maria. Through years of analysis and investigation, CSPD is proud to finally provide answers to Maria's loved ones, end quote. A press conference was held and attended by many of the 15 detectives who had worked the case, DA Michael Allen and CSPD Chief Adrian Vasquez. Chief Vasquez said, "This is a long time coming. Maria was a vibrant and beautiful 14-year-old girl who has deserved so much more in life. I am very grateful that you trusted us and we were able to solve this case." David Honzell addressed the assembled media briefly. "Short and sweet, I appreciate you respecting our privacy. I would like to thank the whole department. I've been on the phone at least once a week for the past 5 years calling, looking for updates, and they've come through for us. To Maria, he had to stop here and shed some silent tears. May you rest in peace. D.A. Allen said, quote, if there's someone out there who has committed a crime and hasn't been caught yet, we're looking for you. Police don't get tired of looking, and neither do the DAs. It's not as good as my tagline, but you get the point. So the homicide investigation into the murder of 14-year-old Maria Honzell is closed and considered resolved. William Kernan Jr. has been named as the sole perpetrator. This is an email to me from C.C. Moore, quote, although we had no close relatives to confirm the hypothesis, I was very comfortable with this outcome due to the fact we had connections to both his maternal and paternal sides and his name was in the file. The chance of this and my coming up with his name independently through IGG being a coincidence would be astronomical. That is true. I don't have any doubts about Kernan's guilt. But while we have some answers, so many questions remain. Did Kernan knock on Jenny's apartment door and say, hi, babe, can I come in, as reported by Ron H.? If so, did he know it was Maria inside, or did he think it was Jenny? Is it possible he had a thing for the teenager? Did she let him in? As for Maria, were her friends right that she was a little dressed up that night? Was she expecting someone? And if so, was that someone Bill Kernan? We don't know. I personally feel that given what I know about Maria from the case file, it's very unlikely that she had a crush on an older guy and no one knew about it. Maria did not keep secrets. She was an open book. And speaking of an open book, Kernan's wife Bonnie said that he was one too. He did not keep secrets. But then, who was Carolyn? Jenny Kay reported 2 days after the murder that she called Kernan's wife Carolyn, who said she hadn't seen him. Was Bill Kernan living a double life? If so, where the heck did Maria fit in? Was she a specific target, or was she just in the wrong place at the wrong time? How did the ashtray get knocked off the coffee table and the contents spilled on the floor? Was Kernan visiting with Maria? And then what happened? Why did Kernan attack her in the hallway where John watched, and then on Jenny's bed, rip the top off her jumpsuit, go into the kitchen to get a knife, and come back and stab her to death? Searching the kitchen for a weapon indicates he came to the apartment unarmed. But then what about the bloody knife hilt found in the apartment? Did his own weapon break and he had to grab another, just like David Sinopoli in the Lindy Beekler case? And what would he have done if he had seen 8-year-old John watching him stab Maria? There is a whole other set of questions I have that relate to the dog, Fritzy. Remember that Jenny said when she and Jeff got home that evening, she could hear her dog barking from inside the apartment. Where was the dog when Kernan was attacking and stabbing Maria? Surely he would have been barking. Why did John never make reference to the dog barking? I can't answer that. So many questions that I can't wrap my head around. For now, all we know for certain is that William Kernan killed Maria in Jenny's apartment. There is no evidence that he raped her, and he is not suspected in any other crimes. Maria can now rest in peace. For years, her grave remained unmarked because when her father, Glenn Sr., died, he had stopped making payments on the marker he had installed, and it was removed. In January 2022, after local news station KRDO aired a piece on the unsolved case, Maria's nephew, Zach, initiated a fundraising campaign for a new headstone for her, and Colorado Springs residents chipped in for a lovely one, which was recently installed. It reads, Our Precious Angel, Maria Lorraine Honzell, and has an etched broken heart at the center of the granite stone marker. After 47 years, Maria Honzell's case is resolved thanks to forensic genealogy. And if you're one of the bad guys, they are coming for you. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to DNAIDpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.